Before bullets, before tanks, before the roar of cannons, there were two men, two kings, two predators circling the same battlefield. One wore the cross of Christ, his sword flashing like lightning. The other raised the crescent of Islam, his banner flowing like desert wind. And though they fought for the same city, what emerged was not only a war of blades, but a duel of honor, respect, and legend. This is the story of Richard the Lionheart and Salahuddin Ayyubi, the two enemies who became, in some ways, brothers. History remembers few rivalries as vividly as this one. On one side, Richard I of England, called Coeur de Lion, the Lionheart, a king who feared no man, whose charge could break a wall of shields. On the other, Salahuddin Ayyubi, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the warrior who rose from obscurity to unite Islam, the man who reclaimed Jerusalem after a century of Crusader rule. When these two giants clashed in the Third Crusade, the world held its breath. They never fought a duel with steel, yet every move they made was like two grandmasters locked across a board of blood and sand. Richard was born into fire, a son of Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine. He was raised not as a politician, but as a warrior prince. From boyhood, Richard trained with sword and lance, leading armies in France before he was 20. Chroniclers wrote that his voice carried across a battlefield, like a trumpet call, and when his banner was raised, men followed him as if possessed. Salahuddin's story was different. He was not born to kingship, but to the Kurdish lands of Tikrit, a quiet boy, fascinated not with war, but with religion. He studied the Quran more than he sharpened blades. Yet fate called him to battle, serving under his uncle Shirkuh in Egypt. He rose swiftly, not through brutality, but through a rare gift: mercy, loyalty, and an iron will. By 1187, Salahuddin had united the Muslim world. His armies crushed the Crusaders at Hattin, and Jerusalem, the holy city, returned to Islamic rule. The world gasped, and Christendom cried out for vengeance. The Third Crusade was. Imagine the scene. Richard set sail from Europe in 1190. Ship after ship, sails billowing, crosses painted in crimson, knights in chainmail, horses packed below deck, all chanting hymns that echoed across the sea. They were not men of peace. They were soldiers of God. And their leader? A king who wielded his sword like a thunderbolt. Meanwhile, in the east, Salahuddin prepared. He knew the fury of Europe was coming, but his camp was not one of drunken knights and feudal lords. It was disciplined, organized, rooted in faith. Every morning, the muezzin's call rose over the desert. Warriors prayed, sharpened their blades, and swore allegiance not just to Salahuddin, but to a cause larger than any one man. Defense of their lands, their families, their faith. The stage was set. The desert would become a chessboard, and kings would play with human lives as pawns. The clash began at Acre, 1191. Richard's forces, scarred from storms and disease, laid siege to the great coastal city. For 2 long years the walls held. But when Richard arrived, everything changed. His engines hurled stones that shook the earth. His archers blackened the sky with arrows. Finally, the city fell. And then came the moment that seared itself into history. Richard, impatient, ordered the execution of 2,700 Muslim prisoners. Men, women, even children. Their bodies lay like a warning on the sand. Salahuddin's heart hardened. This was no holy night. This was a lion with blood on his jaws. Yet the Sultan did not retaliate with the same cruelty. When Christian captives fell into his hands, he often spared them, even ransomed them back. It was not weakness. It was strategy, and it was honor. Their next encounter was at Arsuf. Salahuddin's cavalry, swift as desert hawks, harassed the Crusaders with arrows and ambushes. For hours Richard held his men in formation, like an iron wall creeping forward. Finally, when the Saracens pressed too close, Richard unleashed his knights. The charge exploded like thunder across the sand. Salahuddin's lines broke. It was one of Richard's greatest victories. But still, Jerusalem stood, and Salahuddin was not broken. Here lies the paradox. Though they were enemies, each began to admire the other. When Richard fell ill with fever, Salahuddin sent him fruit, snow to cool his water, and even his personal physician. When Richard's horse was killed in battle, Salahuddin sent him 2 more, a gift from enemy to enemy. This was no ordinary war. It was a duel of men who recognized themselves in each other. Both were lions. Both ruled not just by fear, but by the loyalty they inspired. Chroniclers tell us Richard once said, "If God had seen fit, Salahuddin would have been a great Christian," and some in the East whispered, "If the Lionheart had been born a Muslim, he might have been a great Sultan." For all their courage, neither man would claim ultimate victory. Richard advanced close to Jerusalem, but never dared assault its walls. He knew, even if he captured it, he could not hold it. Winter, desert, and Salahuddin's shadow loomed too great. In 1192, the two finally made peace. The treaty was simple. Jerusalem would remain in Muslim hands, but Christian pilgrims could visit in safety. Richard sailed home, his body scarred, never to return to the Holy Land. Salahuddin, weary from years of war, died the next year. So poor at his death, he left barely enough money to pay for his own burial. The Sultan who ruled an empire, laid in the ground with nothing but honor. Their duel ended not with a blade, but with respect. Centuries have passed. Empires have risen and fallen. Yet the names Richard the Lionheart and Salahuddin Ayyubi still echo. To the west, Richard is remembered as the crusading king, the fearless knight who embodied chivalry. To the east, Salahuddin is revered as the warrior of faith, the just ruler, the liberator of Jerusalem. But perhaps their true legacy lies not in blood spilled, nor walls captured, but in the strange thread of respect that bound them across faiths, across battlefields, enemies, and yet brothers in honor. It asks us, in an age of endless conflict, what does it mean when even mortal enemies can show mercy? When two men who swore to destroy each other saw in their foe a reflection of themselves? Before tanks, before guns, before the world we know today, there were two kings, one from the cold isles of England, one from the golden sands of Damascus. Their blades clashed, their armies bled, but in the end, their names rose together into legend. This was Richard the Lionheart and Salahuddin Ayyubi, the duel of legends. If this story moved you, if you felt the roar of the lion, or the calm strength of the crescent, leave a like, share this tale, and subscribe for more forgotten echoes of history. Because as long as we tell these stories, legends never truly die.